Hey everybody, it is Sunday afternoon and we are going to take an impromptu trip around the world. It's been a little while since we've had a look at all my tanks in one go, so we're going to do that today. We're going to start here with my waterfall tank, and not a lot going on within the tank itself. I did want to point out, I was thinking the other day about it. If you remember, way back in the summertime, in the early summertime, I put a water lily in there, and I was wondering whether or not it would have enough light to grow and do well in this tank. I've never had one thrive yet. I've bought 3 or 4 of them now, and every time I've planted them, everywhere from near the surface to all the way down in the bottom, they have never done much of anything. And if you look closely, you can still see right down in this little area those tiny little leaves sticking out between the rock. If you can make them out, I can't really even see them on my monitor here, but they're there, and that's that water lily, but that's all it's ever done. It's still somehow sort of surviving and hanging on, and that's all it's doing. So just a thought. I don't know why I was thinking about that the other day, but I wanted to point that out in case anybody remembered me planting that in there. Otherwise, everything within the tank itself is doing fine. I've started bringing in some of the outdoors plants, you know, some of the stuff we kept outside over the summer. We're actually getting some beautiful flowers here on this Rex begonia, and I've been told that this is a male, and that's why the flowers are so small compared to what you see on a lot of begonias. I don't know if that's true, but it certainly makes sense to me. I've seen plenty of plants where the females are the ones that make the big showy flowers, and the males only produce enough to just generate some pollen, and that's about it. So very well could be little male flowers, I don't know, but they're pretty nonetheless. As far as the waterfall itself goes, I do believe I found where the leak is. It was in the rubber right there. I've made a temporary patch, but I'm not going to run any water over that patch. I'm going to let that sit until I'm ready to start laying the rubber over all of it. And all we're really going to cover is this bottom basin and the area where here this actually holds a little bit of standing water, and water is continuously running over this, the lip right there. We're going to rubberize up through the channel, and we're going to rubberize the falls here, and then we're going to rubberize up inside this basin at the top. I'm not going to worry about coating all this underside where a little bit of water drips here and there. We've got this area over here where we'll get some splashing, and this will have a little tiny bit of water will flow over here, and it'll stay wet and damp, and that'll keep plants alive over there, but it's not going to be standing water in it, and I'm not concerned about those areas. I don't believe for a moment that that's where we're getting the leak from. The leak is coming from where water is either standing or continuously flowing, and my 2 standing water tests have not shown any leaks, so it's got to be that spot. And so that's what we're going to do. We're just going to patch over that whole section. I may as well just do the whole area where the water's flowing, and we'll call it good. It's actually interesting. I just want to point out that my camera just switched over to daylight mode in its filming, so that's how good and bright this LED grow light is. Wow, that really impresses me that camera just switched over to outside daylight mode of filming. So anyway, that's all that's really going on with the waterfall tank itself. My foot tank is still ticking over like a clock. I did just do a big top off yesterday. That's why the water looks a little bit cloudy. I've got a few very small guppies in there. They're not exactly fry, but they're young enough that they've definitely been bred in that tank. And I've still got my cherry barb doing just fine in there. So it's been years now, and that cherry barb's still just swimming away as if nothing happened. So that's the rundown on my whole sort of waterfall system. We're going to move on to my... Actually, let's turn these lights out before we move on so we don't have so much glare on the rest of the video. My 29 miscellaneous is in need of some maintenance. I haven't really done a water change on this tank in a while, and if we look, the water is almost always backflowing through that center section. I have no idea why, but this filter here, the biologicals clog up so quickly. It only seems like every, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks, and then I've got water flowing back through that middle section again. I change the filters in this tank far more frequently than I actually do water changes. I'll just swap out some filters and let the tank keep going and not even worry about doing a water change. I don't feel that you have to do both at the same time. You don't necessarily need to do a water change just because you're changing the filter, and sometimes if you're doing a quick water change, you don't necessarily need to mess with the filter. So it's not always a 1-for-1 ratio that we work with here. So this one definitely does need both, though. It's been a while since I've done a water change. I've topped the water off a couple times. You can see it's already low enough that it kind of needs another top off. I think rather than topping it off this time, I'm going to go ahead and just do a water change on it. So we'll get to that whenever we get to it. Fish-wise, everything is doing same as it always is. This is one of my tanks that just clicked over like a clock. There's my big, beautiful angelfish. Of course, when they look right at you, they vanish. They're just wafer thin, and you can't even see them. But if you get that side view, they turn into big, showy, amazing-looking fish. And this one's really beautiful. I really, really love the way this angelfish looks. And again, it's not any named type of angelfish. I always refer to it as a smoky angelfish, but that is not the type. I bought it as a mixed assorted angelfish for about $5 or whatever it cost, and I refer to it as being smoky because of its coloration. It just simply looks that way to me. But again, it's just an assorted angelfish I got for a few dollars, and then look at that. It is awesome. I just love this angelfish. So moving on to my 55-gallon Gourami tank. This tank is going to get a water change, but mainly because it needs a haircut. It's getting really, really shaggy in there. That water Sprite grows like a weed. I've got a ton of light on this tank. It's got loads of nutrients. There's plenty of organics in the tank. This is a pretty heavily stocked tank. I'm not shy about the way I feed it. And the plants in here are just really thriving and doing well. I struggled for a long time with algae and hair algae and cyanobacteria, and I finally stopped messing with it and just let it all sort of fall over, and it worked itself out as it usually does. It took about 6 or 8 months, but it really looks good now. I'm glad I was patient with it. The Gouramis, this one in particular, are just starting to look absolutely incredible, and that's one of the reasons I want to get in here and trim some of these plants back. You just don't realize how much light all of that greenery is soaking up. And it still gives a pleasant sort of greenish glow to the tank, and I really do like that. I like that softer look. I like the way the Java moss is starting to grow. I'm going to leave this alone completely because that looks awesome. I really do. I have a love-hate relationship with Java moss. It's really cool, and it looks amazing the way it grows into these big, they almost look like Christmas trees or something underwater, or I don't know. It's like if you could shrink down and be inside like the moss you see growing in your backyard. This is like a giant version of it underwater or something. It looks amazing, but you can see how it's growing up the side of that wood already. That stuff will get on your glass. It'll grow on everything. If you let Java moss get a foothold in your tank, it will grow on everything, and it can be problematic. So I have a kind of love-hate relationship with the Java moss. There's more of it there. Again, looks amazing. And I also have to point out that having these gouramis in the tank has been helping with the hair algae. If you look closely at this Java Windelov, you can see all of the hair algae still sort of growing on everything. But when I stand here and I watch these gouramis and they're not patiently waiting for me to feed them, they're in there feeding themselves and they're munching on all that algae the whole time. And so they're really doing a good job of helping keep this tank looking good. One way to have a successful tank is to stock it properly with the type of fish that will help maintain your interior. I know we all think about having like a cleanup crew and a ground crew, but having like an algae eating crew doesn't hurt either. So moving on to my 55-gallon tank, the only thing I really have to point out in this tank, we got something extra exciting to look at in this tank. I was going to point out that I had a dead guppy in this tank, and it was lying on the bottom right in this corner. Oh, yep, never mind, there it is. It's still, if you see over by that little rock, I don't want to put my hand near the tank because it's going to scare that little South American Bumblebee Catfish. But if you look just to about the 11 o'clock position where its head is, you'll see that little white thing in the by the green. and that is the dead guppy. So my initial thought when I glanced down there was that the dead guppy was gone, and there's my otherwise very reclusive and very nocturnal South American bumblebee catfish. So I thought it'd come out for a little dead guppy snack. And something's been eating that dead guppy. That's why I left it in the tank. I generally will leave dead fish in the tank if they're small. And again, if they don't die from some sort of disease or disorder, I'll leave them in the tank. If it's just a dead guppy, who cares? I have guppies that, you know, die of old age all the time or whatever reason, and they just become food in the tank. And in this case, I'm really surprised that that catfish did not get it. I'm also really surprised that that catfish is even out, especially with me being in the room and basically shouting in its face. Trying to do this without banging my microphone mount against the glass. I've done that several times already. If you've heard any big knocking noises, I don't know whether that's coming through or not, but I've knocked my receiver into the glass a few times. Oh, there we go. I'm sorry, I'm trying to hold this camera still with the wrong hand. We just seldom get a really good solid look at this bumblebee catfish, and so there you go. But at the same time, I feel like at this point, if you really want to look at it any longer, you can just hit pause, because that's about all we're doing here anyway, is just kind of stopping to look at a fish line on the bottom. So otherwise, the tank is just doing its thing. You can see I've got some nice green growth on my Anubias right there. I've got some good vigorous growth on the Anubias back here. The existing Anubias that's always been in there has that sort of brown cyanobacteria stuff that grows on it. That stays fairly well scraped off because of my big Pleco that is in there. I don't know if you noticed its tail or not, but if you can look in the back on the tank on the bottom, you can see the Pleco's tail hanging down. The Pleco itself is hiding up here in the bushes and is surprisingly large for the way it can just vanish in this 55-gallon tank. It's weird. So that's doing well. My two Siamese algae eaters in this tank do not do a whole lot of algae eating anymore. They do a lot of laying in the leaves. You can see one right there at the top, and if you look down through there a little bit, don't know how well it's coming out, but you can kind of make out the second one is lying in the bushes back there. And that's kind of all they do now. They don't really do much in the way of eating algae. So the old adage about how algae eating fish usually eat a lot more algae when they're younger, but as they get older they tend to eat less algae. I find that to be true, but I don't find it to be true in the sense that they sort of switch from an algae based diet to a more meaty based diet as they get older. I don't find that to be true at all. I find that their diet just gets less, and that's the same with anything. It's a metabolism thing. Think about how much a teenager eats versus how much, you know, somebody that's middle-aged or an elderly person needs to eat every day. It's a vast difference in quantities of food, and it's the same with the fish. A young fish is going to eat much more than an older fish that isn't doing a whole lot of growing anymore. And so I think that's where we are with that. And then, of course, if you've noticed, I've still got one diamond tetra that is struggling. That's the one that's got the swim bladder issue. The other one that was in here that had the boogered up eye, that one I did find dead a couple days ago. It was in there stuck to the power head, and so I went ahead and flushed that one down the toilet. That fish that size is a little bit big to leave in the tank by itself, you know, and be left in there for food. If it's a little guppy or a neon or something like that, that's a little different. But the tetra got flushed. So that's about all that's going on in my 55. We'll move over to my 40 breeder, and I literally don't have anything at all to add about this tank since the last time we did video on it, so we're not going to spend much time at all. I just knocked into the glass again, so if that knock was audible, I apologize. There's my rubber lip pleco. We seldom ever even see the fish that are in this tank. I've got 4 Siamese algae eaters, and I've got 2 rubber lip plecos. There's one of them, and that's about all there is to say. If you missed the last update on this tank, it's just kind of sitting here waiting for me to get to it and do something about it, but we will one day. Moving on to my 125-gallon New World tank. This one is not a whole lot different than last time we looked at it, but one thing I did notice this morning, if I can get my positioning right here. You'll see the sort of lead fish right there is that bluegill. And while it definitely looks like there's a little bit of it, you got to see right there. You see how it's sort of asserting its authority? I saw it doing that this morning, but a little more aggressively than that, and it was definitely starting to chase a few of those silver dollars around. So I don't know if it's becoming territorial, if it's just suddenly become sexually mature and now it's starting to stake out its own claim. I don't know if it's just trying to say I'm the leader of this group. It's not anywhere near the kind of aggression I'm concerned about at this point, especially if you compare it to the kind of aggression you can see from other species of sunfish, especially if you've got a mated or spawning pair. They can be really, really highly aggressive fish. And so we're going to have to wait and see. I don't know how aggressive this one's going to turn out to be. If I have to get rid of it, I can always get rid of it. It's not a big deal. I got places I can take it legally and ecologically safely. But I don't know. We're going to have to wait and see. Like I said, it's not too bad, but you can clearly see it's in there making its presence known and letting everybody else know that he's the big fish in the tank. Not getting a huge amount of color off of it yet. Look, it's even trying to tell me it's the big fish in the tank. I'm not getting a huge amount of color off of it yet, but it's not bad. It's definitely brighter and more colorful than some of the other sunfish I've kept over the years. When you see these fish out in their natural environment in real sunlight, they are stunning. I always sort of think about them, even though I want to make it perfectly clear they are not cichlids. I always kind of think about them as our sort of freshwater, cold water, North American cichlids, because they've got that same vibrant sparkle and those iridescent colors and so on and so forth. But they are not cichlids. Bluegills, bass, and everything that's in that sunfish family are not cichlids. And you can see he's definitely getting a little bit aggressive. We're going to have to start paying a little more attention to him. It's going to be interesting if he starts getting aggressive with my tilapia down there, which is a cichlid, and we start getting a territorial battle between those two. That will be interesting, because I really believe that the sunfish will win that fight. I think the sunfish would turn out to be far more aggressive than that tilapia. That tilapia is pretty mild-mannered. So anyway, enough of that drama. That was a little more than I was expecting to see when we looked at this tank. I was just going to kind of point out how everything's looking good, ticking over. Tank's functioning nice and normal. Everything's flowing just right. Got all my sticks and woodwork sitting around there on the top. And then we're going to move on to my snail tank. We are going to talk about my snail tank for just a minute here. You can see my snail population. Oh, I gotta stop banging that thing into the... Yeah, let's see if that helps. I just bent it out of the way. Maybe it won't bang into everything. The snail population in here is really booming. So we will be doing some more feeding video from Butterbean here pretty soon. I'll be able to throw a few of those in my other tanks that have loaches in them. But I also want to talk soon about mulm. And you can see that this tank is loaded with it. I should have pointed out on my little foot tank in front of my waterfall tank that tank has mulm in it at like world record capacity amounts of mulm. So we're going to be talking about that again one of these days too. I know I keep saying that, but I've got a million videos I want to shoot, and I only have so many days in the week to shoot them. So we're going to move on to my native tank. This tank is doing well enough. I did some maintenance on it the other day, just a real quick water change, but instead of using the gravel vac, I used a regular hose, open-end siphon that really creates a lot of suction, and I went in and removed a lot of the mulm that was collecting in this tank. I don't mind the mulm in there. It's not hurting the tank. It's not just producing waste. It's, again, we're going to have a conversation about mulm and my experiences with it, or my understanding of it. But in this case, long story short, there was simply so much of it that I just needed to remove some of it. It was just a lot of it in there. It was just a big pile of dirt at this end of the tank, or so to speak. That's what it looked like. And I mean, you can see how I've startled the fish, and they've started swimming around, and they've kicked it all up, and it's now moving and flowing around the tank. It was far worse than that before I went in here and did some maintenance. I also got the glass wiped down. I removed about 1.5 pounds of duckweed. I really need to get in here. It's kind of hard to see it at this point, but this is that long hair algae. See if we can make an adjustment right now. I've actually taken the filter part out of the filter, so it's just an open pump with the screen that lays in front of it. I stick my armpit in that water every time I do this. So if I crank the pump open and closed a few times, all the snails and stuff that are on the front of it and the crud and everything kind of breaks loose, and I get some decent water flow again. So we're gonna have to shoot the rest of this video with a wet armpit. See the things I go through for you people? I do want to point out, this moss was on it when I brought it home. This moss was on it when I brought it home. This moss was on it when I brought it home. The green hair algae is just sort of developed, so that probably was there too. But this moss, I'm not so sure about. This is growing like the same moss you can see right here, or the same kind of moss I'd have out in my backyard. But I put a big bunch of Java moss right down here and tucked it in under this rock when we first set this tank up. And I kind of thought that the crayfish ate it, because the crayfish will tear up Java moss. They love it. Oh, speaking of crayfish, you can see one little claw sticking out right now. So as of a couple days ago, there were still definitely 2 alive and well in the tank, and you can see the one right there, so we know there's at least that one. And the more I stir this tank up, the muddier and dirtier the water starts to look. But anyway, I don't know if that moss that we were just looking at is actually the moss I put there, like the Java moss, or is that also some of the regular sphagnum type terrestrial moss that was growing on this piece of wood when I found it? Because if you'll remember, if you saw the video of me finding this piece of wood was not underwater. This was not submerged when I found it. This was lying next to the side of the water, and I brought it home and just stuck it in this tank, and I left it sort of half submerged. And so there could have very well have been terrestrial moss already growing back there. Anyway, it looks awesome. I love it, and I just don't know whether or not I'm the one that put it there. So moving on to my 125, we have to kind of come back here, get around the waterfall, and then we can see the whole tank in one go for a moment. So this tank needs a little bit of maintenance, nothing major. Basically it needs a haircut and glass wipe down, water change, all the basic stuff. But I also have this green cyanobacteria that's coming back again. Now for my regular viewers, I've shot video after video on this and you know all about it, but I've also stopped using the ChemiClean and switched back to the Ultralife. I did that because long ago I used the Ultralife and I used it, and eventually I was suggested to use the ChemiClean, and for me it just worked so good compared to what I had been doing that I just switched, and then I used ChemiClean for years and years. But I was beginning to wonder if I wasn't developing some ChemiClean resistant cyanobacteria, because it seems like no matter what I do, I cannot make this stuff go away. I just cannot get on top of it. I can pound this tank with ChemiClean or whatever, and a month later it's back. And it's not like it just got reintroduced, it's just back. It's just grown back in where it was, before I did the treatment. So I switched over, I started using the Ultralife again, and for about 2 weeks I thought, yay, it got on top of it again. But now here we are a month later maybe, and you can see I just got that green coating on everything. Now, having said that, it's not a big deal. It's not hurting anything. I don't really care. It's just getting to the point where it's starting to look ugly. There's just enough of it in there that just looks kind of gross, And so I need to get in there with my Siphon and just vac a bunch of that out of there. I honestly don't know whether I'm going to bother doing another treatment yet. I might just do a Siphon, get it looking decent, and we'll wait until it really starts to get a hold where it's starting to look ugly, and then I'll do a treatment again at some point in the future, I'm sure. Otherwise, nothing really to report on this tank, although I can confirm that as of a few days ago at least, the Synodontis that I've added to this tank is still alive. It's still super reclusive apparently, but it still is in there and it still is alive. I did see it moving around in the depths and the darkness the other day. So that's about it for the 125. Moving on to my 20-gallon, whatever you want to call it, tank. Oh, that's right, we're calling this my deep sand bed tank. Not much to talk about on this one. I did a really quick video yesterday about how to use your siphon properly. I was actually sick yesterday. I spent almost all day asleep. I came downstairs 3 times, once to turn the lights on. I shot that video. I came down again in the evening to throw some food at the fish, and then I came down again to turn the lights off at 10 o'clock. Otherwise, I was asleep yesterday, and that's why you got the quick 1-minute video on how to use a siphon. And I just did this tank as a quick example. But in doing so, after I finished shooting that video, I went ahead and did a full 5-gallon water change. I didn't bother wiping down the glass or changing the filter or anything. Again, I was not feeling well at all yesterday, and so we did do a simple water change. The 2 rams in here still look fantastic. I have actually not checked the nitrate. I don't yet believe we're getting denitrification. I was getting really, really low levels of nitrate when I was checking before, but after adding more of these ember tetras, I now have about 15 of those little red ember tetras in there. Now I'm starting to see nitrate in the tank a little more like I expected to see it before, a little higher numbers. So I don't at this point believe we're getting any reduction in nitrate, but I don't know. We're gonna have to wait and see and give it time. I know I shot a video a while ago. Just I was amazed at how little nitrate I was seeing, and the speed with which the tank seemed to develop was just astounding. So again, now I'm not so sure if I was just reading those numbers wrong, or if I was just had wrong expectations, or what the deal was. That one back there, I believe, is the female. It's got a really, really fat, rounded belly, and it's a very sort of pink belly, and I believe that is indicative of the females, whereas this one is much more slender and has more of a yellow belly on it, and I believe this one's the male. So when they get a little bit older, I'm hoping we've got a little mommy fish and a little daddy fish, and that'll be really cool to see whether or not I can breed German blue rams, because I've never been able to keep German blue rams for any length of time in the past. So we'll have to wait and see if these grow to maturity and then actually, you know, fall in love and all that kind of stuff. So moving on to my quarantine tank. I don't know why, but I always just leave these fish in there. They've been bred in this tank. They've lived in this tank their whole life. They were born in there. And I scooped a whole bunch of them out recently. Some of them wound up being feeders. I know that's not pleasant, but that's just the reality sometimes. And a lot of them went and scattered. You know, I've only got so many tanks that I can put red wag platies in. And I've only, you know, I can only have so many red wag platies in each one of those tanks. And my fish store that will take these from me is an hour drive away when I get down that way, so it's not really always practical for me to just run them down to the fish store or give them away to somebody or whatever. So like I said, sometimes unfortunately some of them do become feeders, but I'm kind of surprised. I left 5 of them in there and I see 4 now. There might be a 5th one up in the bushes somewhere that I'm not seeing from my angle, the way I'm standing like this, but there was 5 of them left out of about 30, and I'm really kind of surprised we haven't seen any more babies since then. I really expected by now we'd have about 30 of them in there again. So at the very least, the fish being in there keeps the tank cycled and functioning like a tank, and that way whenever I do need to use it as a quarantine tank, it's already ready. So, you know, whatever, there's that. So moving on to my brackish tank that is no longer technically brackish. Get that forward turned light on there. I don't like running that forward light very much because it's an LED that's got the red and the blue. It's meant for a reef or a planted tank or something, and it just makes sort of an unpleasant light. You can sort of see the reflection there. It's got the red, white, blue lighting and all that, and I can't turn the blues and the reds off. And when I turn it on, you see how it really changes the look of the tank, and I'm not a big fan of it, but for filming purposes it, you know, makes sense to turn it on. And certainly when I've got the camera in the tank and I'm trying to film Butterbean in there feeding, I definitely want to have that forward light turned on. Otherwise, not much to talk about. I did do a water change on this tank not too long ago. I'm trying to keep a better maintenance schedule in this tank. I was really terrible at it for a long time. I mean, there was times where this tank probably went close to a year without getting a water change. Now I try to keep it down to a matter of months, and I really got a wake-up call when I noticed that I've told this story before about how my filter was running but not flowing for months, and somehow Butterbean and all the fish in there survived being in what was effectively a stagnant aquarium. So I try to keep a little closer eye on this tank, and as a result it's starting to look a little nicer. And as I've brought the salinity down, I've had a lot less of that red cyanobacteria, which absolutely confirms for me in my own personal anecdotal experience that red cyanobacteria thrives with saltier water. The more salt you've got in the water, the more likely you are to have that red cyanobacteria over the green-blue stuff. Finally, I will point out that little plant we're looking at in the center of our screen right now that looks all wispy and thin and tucked down into the soil right in front of those rocks is water Sprite, and I'm kind of surprised it's not doing better. I think it still needs to adjust to the water it's in, because this water, while it's not brackish, it does have a lot of mineral salts in it compared to all my other tanks. So this, my other tanks might have, for example, say 250 or 300 parts per million total dissolved solids. This tank's probably got closer to 2,000 parts per million total dissolved solids in it. So I think the plant has a little bit of adjusting to go through. I think the pH in this tank is a lot higher. But overall, I think we're going to get to see some water Sprite growing in this tank at some point. The Guppies certainly love it, and they always look good under that weird red-blue lighting too. And then, of course, Butterbean, if we can ever get him to come up here to the front of the tank, he looks amazing under that light. But it doesn't look natural. Looking amazing doesn't necessarily mean the same as looking natural. So from an overall day-to-day, that's what the tank normally looks like, and that looks a lot more natural. That just has a small, I want to say it's a 3000K, maybe even 2700K LED in the back, and there's also a bunch of crap growing on the glass and everything, which reduces the water too, the light too. Now that I'm thinking about it, this tank actually has a regular aquarium hood just lying on the glass. If I can get my arms out of the way here, and you can see that. So that's just a regular old aquarium hood, and for all I know, this tank might actually have, it's probably got a fluorescent style LED in it, because it comes on instantly. There's no fluorescent light. It's literally been that long since I've done anything with the lighting on this tank that I don't even remember whether it's a tube, like a real fluorescent tube, or if it's actually one of the LED refits that's got, LEDs in it but shaped like a fluorescent tube. Anyway, you get the idea. So there you go. Made it all the way back to where we started. And if you're still with me, I thank you for watching. I'm going to ask you to subscribe. Don't forget I have memberships now and all that good stuff. So thanks for watching this one. Make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you real soon in the next one.